We just had to do it.
Oh. Snyder had been seen to hit James Reed, and some claimed he had also hit Margaret Reed, but Snyder had been popular and Reed was not. Keseberg suggested that Reed should be hanged, but an eventual compromise allowed him to leave the camp without his family, who were to be taken care of by the others. Reed departed alone the next morning, unarmed, but his stepdaughter Virginia rode ahead and secretly provided him with a rifle and food. Aww. Probably banged him too, because they did that back then.
Ew.
Just saying.
The trials that the Donner Party had so far endured resulted in splintered groups, each looking out for themselves and distrustful of the others. Grass was becoming scarce, and the animals were steadily weakening. To relieve the animals' load, everyone was expected to walk. Imagine carrying your 1-year-old with that.
Well, I'm sure they had ways of, like, taking some cloth and, like, strapping them to their chest, just like we do now.
It's heavy.
If you're running out of food, that means you're rationing.
You're not even in the picture.
That's because I'm leaning to my right. I'm uncomfortable leaning this way. Keseberg ejected Hardcoop from his wagon, telling the elderly man that he had to walk or die. A few days later, Hardcoop sat next to a stream, his feet so swollen they had split open. He was not seen again. William Eddy pleaded with the others to find him, but they all refused, swearing they would waste no more resources on a man who was almost 70 years old. Well, you can't make it on your own, guess you're gonna die.
I mean, in a way, I don't blame them, but in a way, that's fair. Meanwhile, Reed caught up with the Donners and proceeded with one of his teamsters, Walter Heron. The two shared a horse and was able to cover 25 to 40 miles, or 40 to 64 kilometers per day. That's a pretty good distance for a horse. See, they also all should have just rode horses all the way there.
Well, what about the wagon?
Yeah.
And not everybody can afford horses.
I know. You would have to let them all your stuff.
There it is. The rest of the party rejoined the Donners, but their hardship continued. Native Americans chased away all the Greg's horses, and another wagon was left behind. With grass in short supply, the cattle spread out more, which allowed the Paiutes to steal 18 more during one evening. Several mornings later, they shot another 21. Holy shit.
Get off my land, bitches.
Yeah, really.
So far, the company had lost nearly 100 oxen and cattle, and their rations were almost completely depleted. With nearly all his cattle gone, Wolfinger stopped at the Humboldt Sink to cache or bury his wagon. Reinhardt and Spitzer stayed behind to help. They returned without him, reporting they had been attacked by Paiutes and he had been killed. What are you reading about?
That's when they finally made it to California.
Yeah, we're getting there.
I'm just saying, that's a long fucking time.
No spoiler alerts, you guys.
I'm not doing spoiler alerts, am I? No. One more stretch of desert lay ahead. The Eddy's oxen had been killed by Native Americans and they were forced to abandon their wagon. The family had eaten all their stores, but the other families refused to assist their children. Really? I mean, I understand not feeding the parents, or maybe, giving them little bits, but feed the kids. The hell? The Eddies were forced to walk, carrying their children and miserable with thirst. Margaret Reed and her children were also now without a wagon, but the desert soon came to an end, and the party found the Truckee River in beautiful, lush country.
Finally. Okay. They had little time to rest, and the company pressed on to cross the mountains before the snows came. Stanton, one of the two men who had left a month earlier to seek assistance in California, found the company, and he brought mules, food, and two Miwok Native Americans named Luis and Salvador.
He also brought news that Reed and Heron, although haggard and starving, had succeeded in reaching Sutter's Fort in California. By this point, according to Rawrick, sorry, to the bedraggled, half-starved members of the Donner Party, it must have seemed that the worst of their problems had passed. They had already endured more than many immigrants ever had.
But it's only beginning. Faced with one last push over mountains that were described as much worse than the Wasatch, the Ragtag Company had to decide whether to forge ahead or rest their cattle. I'd rest their cattle.
I would have. Geez, my allergies.
Either way, you're gonna hit winter. You might as well rest the cattle.
Yeah. It was October 20th, and they had been told the pass would not be snowed in until the middle of November. William Pike was killed with it when a gun being loaded by William Foster was discharged negligently, an event that seemed to make the decision for them. Family by family, they resumed their journey. First the Breens, then the Kesbergs, Stanton with the Reeds, Graves, and the Murphys.
The Donners waited and traveled last. After a few miles of rough terrain, an axle broke one of their wagons. Jacob and George went into the woods to fashion a replacement. George Donner sliced his hand open while chiseling the wood, but it seemed a superficial wound. Oh, well, there goes George Donner.
I see it. Snow began to fall. The Breens made it up the massive, nearly vertical slope, 1,000 feet, to Truckee Lake, now known as Donner Lake. Of course it is. 3 miles from the summit, and camped near a cabin that had been built 2 years earlier by another group of pioneers. Jeez.
The Eddies and Kessenbergs joined the Breens, attempting to make it over the pass, but they found 5 to 10 feet, or 1.5 to 3.0 meters snowdrifts, and were unable to find the trail. They returned back for Truckee Lake, and within a day all the families were camped there except for the Donners, who were 5 miles, 8.0 kilometers below them, half a day's journey.
Jeez Louise.
This one thinks they're interesting.
Over the next few days, several more attempts were made to breach the pass with their wagons and animals, but all efforts failed.
60 members and associates of the Breen, Graves, Reed, Murphy, Kessenberg, and Eddy families set up for the winter at Truckee Lake. The 3 widely separated cabins of pine logs served as their homes, with dirt floors and poorly constructed flat roofs that leaked when it rained.
The Breens occupied one cabin, the Eddies and the Murphys another, and the Reeds and Graves the third. Kesberg built a lean-to for his family against the side of the Breen cabin. I'm sorry, a lean-to isn't going to help you when the wind starts to blow.
What's a lean-to?
A lean-to?
Oh, yeah, what's that?
It's when you take branches and wood and put it up against the side of something so it leans like this. You watching?
Yes.
So it leans like that, and then you cover it with branches and leaves and stuff to keep out the most of, the rain and snow and stuff. But, the sides are most likely going to be open, and you can't cover all the cracks. You know what I mean? So, it's not going to help when the winter hits. Snow starts to fall. You're going to be stuck in there freezing your asses off, even if there is, 5 people to keep warm.
Families used canvas or oxhide to patch the faulty roofs. The cabins had no windows or doors, only large holes to allow entry. Of the 60 at Turkey Lake, 19 were men over 18, 12 were women, and 29 were children, 6 of whom were toddlers or younger.
That's craziness. Farther down the trail, close to Alder Creek, the Donner families hastily constructed tents to house 21 people, including Mrs. Wolfinger, her child, and the Donner's drivers, 6 men, 3 women, and 12 children in all. It began to snow on the evening of November 4th, the beginning of a storm that lasted 8 days. 8 days. Tents aren't going to help you. Lean-tos aren't going to help you. They should have built cabins with enough space for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Keep out the wind and the rain.
By the time the party made camp, very little food remained from the supplies that Stanton had brought back from Sutter's Fort. The oxen began to die, and their carcasses were frozen and stacked.
Well, at least they had food at that point, I guess.
They should have went hunting before it got cold.
Should have. Truckee Lake was not yet frozen, but the pioneers were unfamiliar with catching lake trout. Eddie, the most experienced hunter, killed a bear, but had little luck after that.
Well, it's got a bear.
Still, bears are kind of gamey. There's not much meat.
I never had bear.
It's mostly fat, because they're fattening.
Especially around wintertime.
Right, they're fattening up to hibernate, so.
The Reed and Eddie families had lost almost everything. Margaret Reed promised to pay double when they got to California for the use of 3 oxen from the Graves and Breen families. Graves charged Eddie $25, normally the cost of 2 healthy oxen, for the carcass of an ox that had starved to death. Desperation grew in camp, and some reasoned that individuals might succeed in navigating the pass when the wagons could not. I read yours.
No, you did. I'll keep reading them.
On November 12th, the storm abated, and the small party tried to reach the summit on foot, but found the trek through the soft, deep powder too difficult, and returned that same evening.
Oh. Over the next week, 2 more attempts were made by other small parties, but both quickly failed. On November 21st, a large party of about 22 persons successfully reached the peak. The party traveled about 1.5 miles west of the summit, but this trip too was aborted, and they returned to the lake on November 23rd. Last one, baby.
Patrick Breen began keeping a diary on November 20th. He concerned himself primarily with the weather, marking the storms and how much snow had fallen, but gradually began to include references to God and religion in his entries. Life at Turkey Lake was miserable. The cabins were cramped and filthy, and it snowed so much that people were unable to go outdoors for days. Diet soon consisted of oxhide strips, of which were boiled to make disagreeable glue-like jelly. Ox and horse bones were boiled repeatedly to make soup, and they became so brittle that they would crumble upon chewing. Sometimes they were softened by being charred and eaten.
That's disgusting. Just the thought makes me a tiny bit nauseous, to be honest. Gross. Bit by bit, the Murphy children picked apart the oxhide rug that lay in front of their fireplace, roasted it in the fire, and ate it. A rug. Oxhide rug. That's awful. After the departure of the snowshoe party, 2/3 of the migrants at Truckee Lake were children. Mrs. Graves was in charge of 8. Lavina Murphy and Eleanor Eddy together took care of 9. Goodness.
Migrants caught and ate mice hit straight into their cabins. Many of the people at Turkey Lake were soon weakened and spent most of their time in bed. Occasionally, one would be able to make the full-day trek to see the Donners. News came that Jacob Donner and 3 hired men had died. One of them, Joseph Redenhurt, confessed on his deathbed that he had murdered Wolfinger. George Donner's hand had become infected, which left 4 men to work at the Donner's camp. Told you, bad juju.
Yep. Bad juju. Margaret Reed had managed to save enough food for a Christmas pot of soup to the delight of her children, but by January they were facing starvation and considered eating the ox hides that served as their roof. Margaret Reed, Virginia Milt Elliot, and the servant girl Eliza Williams attempted to walk out, reasoning that it would be better to try to bring food back than sit and watch the children starve. Mm-hmm. Oh, that's sweet of them. Little do they know.
They were gone for 4 days in the snow before they had to turn back. The cabin was now uninhabitable. The oxhide roast served as their food supply, and the families moved in with the Brains. The servants went to live with other families. One day the Graves came by to collect on their debt owed by the Reeds and took the ox hides, all that the family had to eat. That's fucked up. They said they were going to pay you back when they got to California.
Well, they were hungry, obviously. The mountain party at Truckee Lake began to fail. Spitzer died, then Bayless Williams, the driver for the Reeds, also died more from malnutrition than starvation.
What? Okay, right there. Franklin Graves fashioned 14 pairs of snowshoes out of ox bows and hide, and a party of 17 men, women, and children set out on foot in an attempt to cross the mountain pass. As evidence of how grim their choices were, 4 of the men were fathers, 3 of the women who were mothers, gave their young children to other women.
Take my kid, just stay here. Oh no. They packed lightly, taking what had become 6 days of rations, a rifle, a blanket each, a hatchet, and some pistols, hoping to make their way to Bear Valley. Historian Charles McGlashan later called the snowshoe party the Forlorn Hope.
2 of these without snowshoes, Charles Berger and 10-year-old William Murphy, turned back early on. Other members of the party fashioned a pair of snowshoes for 12-year-old Lemuel Murphy on the first evening from one of the packed saddles that they were carrying.
The snowshoes proved to be awkward but effective on the arduous climb. The members of the party were neither well-nourished nor accustomed to camping in snow, 12 feet deep, and by the 3rd day most were snowblind. That's not good. Not at all.
On the 6th day, Eddie discovered his wife had hidden a half-pound of bear meat in his pack. The group set out again for the morning of December 21st. Staten had been straggling for several days, and he remained behind, saying he would follow shortly. His remains were found in that location the following year. So it's December, May, June, July, August, September.
They actually left in April. Huh? They left in April. One of the other parties left in May, but most of them left in April. So that's 8 months. Right there. That's 8 months. April to December. That's crazy. The group became lost and confused. After 2 more days without food, Patrick Dolan proposed one of them should volunteer to die in order to feed the others. Some suggested a duel, while another account describes an attempt to create a lottery to choose a member to sacrifice. Eddie suggested that they keep moving until someone simply fell, but a blizzard forced the group to halt. Antonio, the animal handler, was the first to die. Franklin Graves was the next casualty. Jeez Louise.
When you're that hungry. As the blizzard progressed, Patrick Dolan began to rant deliriously, stripped of his clothes, and ran into the woods. He returned shortly afterwards and died a few hours later. Not long after, possibly because Murphy was near death, some of the group began to eat flesh from Dolan's body. Yummy.
I don't know if I could do it, you know?
I could if I was hungry.
Like, I'm a hungry person, like, all the time, and I love to eat food, but if I was dying, I don't know that I could eat another human being. I would feel really bad. I mean, I'm sure if it came down to it, I could probably do it, but I would feel really bad. I would want to die, you know? Like, you know what? Just kill me and eat me, because I can't fucking do this. Lemuel's sister tried to feed some to her brother, but he died shortly afterwards. Eddie, Salvador, and Luis refused to eat. The next morning, the group stripped the muscles and organs from the bodies of Antonio, Dolan, Graves, and Murphy. They dried them to store for the days ahead, taking care to ensure nobody would have to eat his or her relatives. Oh, well, that's nice of them.
I wouldn't care if they were my relatives.
Well, I'm just saying, you know, if that's your brother or your mother, you're not going to want to eat them, probably.
I would eat them.
But can you imagine them being nice enough to go, okay, this one came from Graves, so all the Graves family don't eat this pile of
This is Jim Bob.
Flesh.
You get Jim Bob, but you don't get this one.
But I mean, that's really nice of them to do that so that nobody had to eat their family members.
After 3 days' rest, they set off again, searching for the trail. Eddie eventually succumbed to his hunger and ate human flesh, but that was soon gone. They began taking apart their snowshoes and to eat the oxhide webbing and discussed killing Luis and Salvador for food before Eddie warned the two men and they quietly left. Do you blame them? Don't tell them that you're going to do it. Jeez Louise.
Jay Fosdick died during the night, leaving only 7 members of the party. Eddie and Mary Graves left to hunt, but when they returned with deer meat, Fosdick's body had already been cut apart for food. Yeah. Ew.
Yummy.
Well, at least they had something other than human flesh during that time, right?
Yeah. After several days, 25 since they had left Turkey Lake, they came across Salvador and Luis, who had not eaten for about 9 days and were close to death. William Foster had shot the pair, believing their flesh was the rest of the group's last hope of avoiding imminent death from starvation. That was murder.
Yeah, it makes you hungry, doesn't it?
It was one thing when they died naturally.
Right, like
starvation, but it's a whole nother thing when you're shooting them. That's kind of
like, well, they're gonna die anyway, right? On January 12th, the group stumbled into a Miwok camp looking so deteriorated that the camp's inhabitants initially fled. The Miwoks gave them what they had to eat: acorns, grass, and pine nuts.
That's nice of them.
Interesting, huh?
After a few days, Eddie continued on with the help of Miwok, to a ranch in a small farming community at the edge of the Sacramento Valley. A hurriedly assembled rescue party found the other 6 survivors on January 17th. Their journey from Truckee Lake had taken 33 days.
That's just not right. James F. Reed made it out of the Sierra Nevada to Rancho Johnson in late October. He was safe and recovering at Sutter's Fort, but each day he became more concerned for the fate of his family and friends. He pleaded with Colonel John C. Fremont to gather a team of men to cross the pass and help the company. In return, Reed promised to join Fremont's forces and fight in the Mexican-American War.
Aww. He was joined by McCutcheon, who had been unable to return with Stratton, as well as some members of the Harlan Young Party. The Harlan Young wagon train had arrived at Sutton's Fort on October 8th, the last to make it over the Sierra Nevada that season. You might have to reuse some.
Isn't that unsafe?
No. It's your own.
The party of roughly 30 horses and a dozen men carried food, supplies, and expected to find the Donner Party on the western side of the mountain along the Bear River below the steep approach to Emigrant Gap. Perhaps starving but alive. When they arrived in the river valley, they found only a pioneer couple, migrants who had been separated from their company, who were now near starvation. Jeez.
Two guys deserted Reed and McCutcheon with some of their horses, but they pressed on further up the valley to Yuba Bottoms. Walking the last mile on foot, Reed and McCutcheon stood looking up at Migrant Gap, only 12 miles, 19 kilometers from the top, blocked by snow, possibly on the same day of the Branners' attempt to lead one last effort to cross the pass from the east. Despondent, they turned back to Sutter's Fort.
Much of the military in California were engaged in the Mexican-American War, and with them the able-bodied men. For example, Colonel Fremont's personnel were occupied at that precise time in capturing Santa Barbara. Throughout the region, roads were blocked, communications compromised, and supplies unavailable. Only 3 men responded to a call for volunteers to rescue the Donner Party.
Reed was led over to San Jose until February because of regional uprising and general confusion. He spent that time speaking with other pioneers and acquaintances. The people of San Jose responded by creating a petition to appeal to the U.S. Navy to assist the people at Truckee Lake. 2 local newspapers reported that members of the Snowshoe Party had resorted to cannibalism, which helped to foster sympathy for those who were still trapped. Residents of the Yerba Buena, many of them recent immigrants, raised $13,000 or $35,000 in 2018 and organized a relief effort to build 2 camps to supply a rescue party for the refugees. Jesus, 201?
Don't tell the world how high my blood sugar is, weirdo. I mean the 1 or 2 people that are actually paying attention. I'm just joking. I'm messing with you, babe. A rescue party, including William Eddy, started on February 4th from Sacramento Valley. Rain and a swollen river forced several delays. Eddy stationed himself at Bear Valley, while the others made steady progress through the snow and storms across the path to Turkey Lake. Sorry. Catching their food at stations along the way so they did not have to carry it all. 3 of the rescue party turned back, but 7 forged on.
On February 18th, my mom's birthday, the 7-man rescue party scaled Fremont Pass, now Donner Pass, as they neared where Eddy told them the cabins would be. They began to shout. Miss Murphy appeared from a hole in the snow, stared at them, and asked, "Are you men from California, or do you come from heaven?"
See, that's my mom's birthday. And that's your mom's birthday. It's funny. The relief party doled out food in small portions, concerned that it might kill them if the emaciated immigrants overate. Makes sense. All the cabins were buried in snow. Sodden oxhide roofs had begun to rot, and the smell was overpowering. 13 people at the camps were dead, and their bodies had been loosely buried in snow near the cabin roofs. Some of the migrants seemed emotionally unstable. Well, yeah, they've been eating human flesh.
It's only bad when you eat their brain.
No, it's not.
It's hot. It makes you go to psychosis.
No, if all you're eating is flesh, even animal flesh, you are losing nutrients that your body needs.
3 of the rescue party trekked to the Donners and brought back 4 gaunt children and 3 adults. Lena Donner had particular difficulty walking up the steep incline from Alder Creek to Truckee Lake. Later, writing, such pain and misery as I endured that day is beyond description. George Donner's arm was so gangrenous that he could not move. 23 people were chosen to go with the rescue party, leaving 21 in the cabins at Truckee Lake and 12 at Alder Creek.
God, that's awful. The rescuers concealed the fate of the snowshoe party, informing the rescued migrants only that they did not return because they were frostbitten. Patty and Tommy Reed were soon too weak to cross the snowdrifts, and no one was strong enough to carry them.
Margaret Reed faced the agonizing predicament of accompanying her 2 older children to Bear Valley and watching her 2 frailest be taken back to Truckee Lake without a parent. She made rescuer Aquila Glover swear on his honor as a Mason that he would return for her children. Patty Reed told her, "Well, Mother, if you never see me again, do the best you can." That is sad.
So sad. Upon their return to the lake, the Breens flatly refused them entry to their cabin, but after Glover left more food, the children were grudgingly admitted. The rescue party was dismayed to find that the first cache station had been broken into by animals, leaving them without food for 4 days. God damn!
Can't get a break.
Not at all.
After struggling on the way over the pass, John Denton slipped into a coma and died. Ida Kaisberg died soon afterwards. Her mother was inconsolable, refusing to let the child's body go.
Jeez.
Don't blame her.
After several days more travel through the difficult country, the rescuers grew very concerned that the children would not survive. Some of them ate the buckskin fringe from one of the rescuers' pants and the shoelaces of another, to the relief party's surprise. On their way down from the mountains, they met the next rescue party, which included James Reed. Upon hearing his voice, Margaret sank into the snow, overwhelmed. Aww.